Hello everybody, Max Scoville here for IGN. Joining me, Vince Ingenito,
Hey.
who reviewed Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, which we are here to talk about, and Brendan Graber and Jared Petty, who've been hard at work on the massive guides that is over on the IGN wiki. I'm really impressed with what you guys have been doing.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you.
They do good work.
This is a huge, huge game, if there's any confusion about that. Vince, you gave it the much holy, hallowed 10 out of 10.
Yeah, that's right. It's a pretty good game.
I've managed to put 15 hours into it, and I'm at 5%, which I think is a pretty big indication about how much there is to really just unpack here.
Absolutely.
We're going to try to talk about this as educatedly as we can.
Good start.
Good start, yeah.
You used the good words.
I'm going to talk real good, and we're going to see how that goes. Let's start things out. Let's talk about Metal Gear's open world. This is the first time that Snake, for lack of a better name, has been in a fully proper open environment, and it's massive. What do you guys make of this?
Yeah, it's amazing how well it works, because usually when franchises make this first step out into the open world, when they typically haven't been in that kind of an environment, there's all this like turning of the gears and like trying to reconcile the franchise's normal gameplay with this new environment. But it just I think because Kojima has been moving this way slowly with with Snake Eater being a little bit more out in the open and then 4 being a little bit more sandboxy. He's been leading up to this a little bit, but it's still like it's such an order of magnitude beyond the size, scope, and amount of freedom that 4 gave you that I just don't know how they got it all to work. It's just super impressive.
Well, it's a very clever design conceit there. I think one of the reasons they were able to pull this off is you've got this big, massive open world, but there's not a lot going on outside the outposts in the villages. Not that it's boring out there. They're well spaced enough that you're always in distance of something interesting, but it's built around nexuses where things happen. And I think that's a lot of what makes this work is they found a way to draw you like a moth to the flame to points where interesting things are occurring, and there are a manageable number of variables within or around each of those little nexus points. It's almost like the technical restrictions that when they first designed Metal Gear for the MSX, and they're like, well, how do we make a game where you can only have a small number of sprites interesting? We'll make absolutely everything on the screen really dangerous. And they've created this big, vast open experience, but that old design principle is kind of still at work where you've got an impressive but not unmanageable number of things happening in each area, and you move between those areas and they interact in interesting ways, but it's something you can get your head around. It was a really smart transition.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really impressive about it is that not just it's structured in this way, like you said, where you're always kind of coming and going to something that's important. Yeah. And despite how, when you really look at it on paper, how rigid that structure is, the world is built and visually and its topography in such a way that you still feel kind of like you're in a big, wide open space, even though in a lot of ways you're right. It is very structured and hey, here's this outpost, here's this one, and here's roads that go between them. That seems fairly simple, but when you're actually out there on your horse, it feels epic, right?
Yeah, it's very impressive of how they structure this place. I mean, I think I need a disclaimer here. I've never played any other Metal Gear games.
Ooh, yeah.
So
no.
I am on this panel for the fresh take. I think I've seen through live streams and everything, I've seen all the other Metal Gears. I just never played them myself. But going into this, I've played a lot of open world games, and a lot of problems I see with other open world games is that they are too big, and sometimes they don't have enough interest to keep you there. I have not found that problem yet. In my many, many hours exploring, they manage to keep you interested no matter where you go, because there's not too much to it. There's just the right amount, and they give you the freedom at any point to take on how you want to take it on.
And that's the key point there, I think, is that, that there's not too much, and all those variables are created with a purpose to interact in amazing ways. There's so much going on when you start comparing how when you try this, it affects that. There are repercussions for practically every action. Experimentation is almost always rewarded. Yes. You try something, and in a startling amount of the time, it works. It's almost like playing NetHack, where they thought of everything.
Yeah.
It's really neat.
No, so I was going to say, I think it's fascinating to see a game of the scale that is Metal Gear, because at its very roots, Metal Gear kind of started as tactical Pac-Man.
Pac-Man, yeah, totally Pac-Man.
You are avoiding combat. Yep. And there's always been kind of a claustrophobia to it. The earlier games are very much about being stuck in some sort of facility, and really, I mean, it wasn't until Snake Eater that really opened up a bunch. And even with 4, it was more kind of in Peace Walker 2, it was more compartmentalized. And in this case, it's really wide open, but the way you approach missions, it's sort of a modular open world. Like you'll have a mission area, and you can leave that, but it sort of cancels the mission you're on, right? And then it becomes free roam.
Yeah, if you're doing a main mission, yeah, that's right. That's how it works. And that's kind of what's intelligent about it too, is that they mold this sandbox to whatever their needs are for the particular mission, which is kind of a unique way of putting it. Like other games don't necessarily, open world games don't necessarily do that. If it's an open world game, then they're like, yeah, the whole world is kind of still there. They do this smart thing where they're like, all right, on this main story mission, you're going to be at this main outpost and maybe the 2 or 3 smaller ones surrounding it, and maybe a bit of desert that's off to the side as well. And it's all of it can have use in the course of that mission, but it does focus you a bit so that you don't feel like you're flailing.
Well, it's fascinating because we were given Ground Zeroes first, which felt small. It felt like a really little game. It felt, I think it's even smaller than the tanker mission felt in Metal Gear Solid 2. And that's kind of the obvious comparison there. But it does kind of, now that I've seen Phantom Pain in action, it does have this similar feel to it. Whereas Ground Zeroes was like, here's your core story mission and then a bunch of kind of really unrelated side missions. Phantom Pain basically repurposes maps that it's already used for one thing, but sending you on a mission that does something different with the space.
Yeah.
You know, so you'll go up and down the same road, chasing one guy for one mission and then doing something else for a different mission. But it doesn't feel like you're reusing it. It feels like you're in this one cohesive space.
I do think that the mission areas they create are very dynamic in the way that you can start off, at point A. There are point B and C. You don't have to go there, but if you do, you can learn some really interesting intel. There's some really cool side objectives, and then you can just go back to point A. Or sometimes you just stay here while your target moves on to another base. And you're like, okay, do I rush off and head him off, or do I take my time and see what this base has to offer first? And I like how every base is not just a carbon copy. Like the way they structure these little villages, they're all different, so that one might, be better off from doing it at nighttime. One may be better off doing it in the daytime. Like one is better for using a cardboard box, and they kind of like to play with the different options you have. I love that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Is like how these spaces, they're diverse. There's like 20-something. I think it's like 25 different infiltration areas between the smaller outposts and the bigger ones in each of the 2 sandboxes, for a total of around 50 different bases, maps, so to speak, that you get to infiltrate. And like you said, they all provide a canvas that you can engage with the many different tools that you have in different ways. And this is what's so purposeful and smart about their open worlds, is that most open worlds are either like, they're going to shock and awe you by how big they are. Like, whoa, I can get lost in this place, and that can be fun for sure. Yeah. Or they fill it up with busy work to do, and that can be great if you're like really obsessive into collecting. But Metal Gear, Phantom Pain is really all about like, we just want to create a play space that is tailor-made to only allow you to use the tons and tons and tons of tools we've given you to maximum effect.
I think that the key thing to differentiate is the idea of a sandbox, which I feel like is a place to play in, versus an open world, which is kind of an ecosystem. And I think this is very much more both, like literally there is sand and a box, but also like as far as an open world, it feels alive but desolate. Like
sure.
I've only seen a very small portion of Afghanistan so far. But it's like there aren't civilians running around. There aren't so much like it's not GTA. You can't go to Urban Outfitters. Like it's kind of it feels more like a place where the mechanics live than where the world like the
I think it's very deliberately designed that way. I think you raise a good point. You talked about how you could go back to areas in different directions and it didn't feel like the assets were being reused in any kind of forced way. There's almost going back to another Konami classic, there's almost a Castlevania inverted castle degree of design sophistication going on.
Yes.
It is a place for the mechanics to live. I think you absolutely nailed it when you said that. And that's what differentiates this environment from so many others. I can't remember the last time I had this much fun experimenting in a game. It might have been a very different game, Crackdown, where you've got a point and you can approach it any way you want. There's a lot of that DNA there in Metal Gear 5. It's not an action game, but it's the same thing. Here's a thing, and you can just try anything you want in the world.
Yeah, I also want to say, like, as far as these kind of stealth versus brutal ways to play, like I've seen a lot of games like Dishonored comes to mind where it's like, oh, you can play very non-lethal and silent, but here's these really cool gadgets to kill people with, but then we penalize you for. This game doesn't penalize you for anything. It lets you, work with whatever you want to, and there's no like bad feeling about it. Like there are really cool non-lethal gadgets and there's really cool lethal gadgets. They don't kind of favor any which way. They're like, whatever you want to go with it, that's a really cool way to go.
Yeah, there's just tons and tons of different toys, and none of them are wrong. Like I remember playing Metal Gear Solid 4 and being surprised relative to other Metal Gear games how just how many different kinds of guns and how much customization there was of the different guns. But at the end of the day, I was always like, well, why would I bother using a shotgun? Because all that does is kill people real good, and if I kill someone, my ranking goes like way down.
That was something that bugged me about 4 is that pretty much right off maybe this was part of the message of that game because it was about the arms race and like a global weapons market basically. But like I felt like you could just get all the guns right off the bat. Like you didn't really have to work too hard to get a bunch of guns. In this case, I'm developing stuff. I'm paying to have guns developed, and like there's a sense of like actually there's a carrot in front of the horse.
Yeah.
It's actually body armor in front of the horse that I really want to work towards. But like, I mean, there's a sense of kind of actually of building towards something. And like I play a game like Far Cry, and like I feel like you get too powerful too quickly. But the way that this kind of scales in this world is really satisfying.
No, I love that arc. I mean, I've completed the main story missions from Chapter 1 at this point, and there's just so much more to go for. I mean, these tantalizing things out there, and I'm just like, come to me, forbidden fruit. I want, and there's so much to chase. And I agree, they really nailed that. The pace of your rewards, it's not like Destiny where you're just always wishing you could have something you can never get. They're always giving you something worth having. But there's so much out there to get.
You unlock a new sticker for your emblem,
Yeah,
a new word. It says coward.
Let us speak no more of Destiny. But I'm getting enough to always feel like I'm being rewarded. But there's so much cool out there that I still want to get that I'm amazed that having played the game a really long time at this point, that I haven't begun to collect everything that I want for my arsenal.
Something I miss about older games is sort of the pageantry with which you get a new item or weapon. You know, like this sense of being like, oh, I got the Nikita missile launcher in like the first Metal Gear Solid, or like, did you get that in Metal Gear 2? I forget. Anyway, the first time you get a cool new weapon and you're like, this is gonna be fun. I can finally go back and do this thing that I was trying to do before. It manages to have that, but it's in a much more complex kind of gradual way.
Yeah, and what I love is that even though it's not as regimented as it was in previous games where it's like, okay, once you get into this part of the complex, you will get access to the Nikita missile launcher, and then you can go. It's not as regimented as that, but what's really neat is that as you start to advance through the levels, you'll start to be put into situations more and more often where you're kind of like, what would be awfully good here? If I had this thing. But even that becomes an interesting wrinkle to the gameplay, because then you can end up going, well, I will stop trying to do this until I've managed to research this new gadget that looks like it would probably be really useful here. Or I can just get really creative, think outside the box, and find a way to complete it without it.
Go ahead.
If you developed it but didn't bring it, I'm going to follow a supply drop on that guy's head and then take the rocket launcher.
It's a game that really lets you play it. Like it's about experimentation and creativity, and mechanically it is an incredibly sound, beautiful world to play in.